Welcome to the Awaken Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. Get ready to create magic and miracles as you lean into your heart's desires. I believe not only does the heart want what it wants, but it knows. This show is a weekly deep dive into what it means to live from an awakened heart. I'll be sharing inspiring stories and real conversations with people just like you, who have turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. My mission is to show you how you too can be connected and heart-centered in every area of your life. Your journey to aligning with more love, more joy, and your wildest dreams come true starts now. Welcome, everyone, to the fourth episode of the Awaken Heart Podcast. We have with us today a very special guest, Marilena Fallaris, author of Womenemies and How to Eliminate Them, which brings up the very important topic of women and how we relate to each other. Marilena's impressive background includes graduating with top honors from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and Pepperdine Law School. She began practicing law and being involved in legal marketing and managing others to be their best in their careers. A life experience caused her to reflect upon how she became the womenemy she writes about, and from there, her book was born. It's no surprise that Womenemies went to the #1 bestseller list on Amazon because it's so timely about how we relate to each other as women, and most importantly, how we relate to ourselves. I feel this book couldn't come at a better time because we really need to come together to support each other as women now more than ever. And today's guest and author brings that very important topic to the forefront. Welcome, Marilena. I'm so happy to have you here today. And as you heard from the introduction, I gave a little bit about what your background is. I mean, you have such a broad and fascinating background. Like, you've so well accomplished. And now you've written this book and it's published and it's out. Womenemies, I trip over that word, Womenemies. And how to eliminate them. And it's actually such a positive message for women out there everywhere to really culture real relationships and not have these women that are not really relating to each other the right way, and how to elevate and uplift each other. I'm in the middle of that book. I'm just completely enthralled, and I'll probably finish the whole thing after we get off this conversation. Yeah, so I would love to just go back a little bit into how that came about. I know I've read some of the emails that led to a little bit of an awakening, how you were being that yourself. You were being your own womenemy. So let's go back a little bit, how that happened.
Absolutely. The awakening is exactly what you just said. And first of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. I'm super excited. I think your message is wonderful. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
So what happened, my book is called Womenemies, and each chapter deals with how a woman is an enemy to another woman. And there's, like you said, a positive message. Each chapter shows an example of how it's a lesson and also an example of how we can uplift one another through those lessons. Back to your question of how it all started, I was engaged pretty young in my 20s, but I'd been in a relationship for 9 years. I had my wedding dress and everything. And I was contacted by the other woman that I didn't know existed until she contacted me. As you can imagine, my whole world at 27 was crumbling. But I didn't blame her at that point. I mean, I thought it was sad that she had engaged in relationships when she knew that he was engaged, but I blamed him because he was the person I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. So I ended that relationship, and which was a very heartbreaking relationship, and it took me on a different path for a while, figuring out what I want from life, how I want to be treated. A year later, that same woman emailed me out of the blue, found my new email address, and was telling me to back off her man, who was my ex-fiance. Now I laugh at it. Back then, I had not tried to get back together with my ex-fiance, and I was seeing red. And in the book, they talk about how my boss, who was very, very cool, saw my Mediterranean temper all over my face. And I engaged back and forth twice in emails with her. Now, while I never swore at her or said anything explicit, and you'll see that in the book, I went low, and in my words, I basically called her uneducated and different sorts of scum. And it wasn't nice. If I would ever go back, I probably wouldn't have written those emails. But in the time, it felt really good because I felt like I was protecting myself and she had hurt me. You know, that those emails were actually read by some of my friends at bachelorette parties. I mean, there's some comedy in there. But what I realized when I reflected, because I was 28, and I said, you know, I just took a step down and I became her enemy. And I took one, she hurt me, but now I'm hurting her. And while it's in my mind justified, it actually wasn't, because I could have just walked away and she would have written those emails and I never would have responded, and that would have been it. So it got me thinking. I was in a coffee shop in Santa Monica, and I started outlining different ways women are enemies to each other. And past 10 years, I've taken notes, I've written it, and each chapter, it could be in the workforce, in friendships, with your mother-in-law, mothers judging each other when they're going through childbirth and after. And I wanted to put a positive message at each chapter of how woman has uplifted me, because as much as there's been negative experiences in my life, which I think everyone has experienced, there have been more positive, but our minds are always trained to go to the negative. So I said, you know, we can't eliminate the enemy we don't see. We need to talk about it more than just women need to be nicer to each other. We need to really show the examples, show how the catastrophic effects that it can have on somebody, even if it's not your intent, and discuss and highlight the positive that women do for each other, because that's only how we're going to eliminate the existence of womenemies, because each person is not a bad person. They just have an instance where they're becoming a womenemy. I believe that was my awakening and moving forward from that. So that's where it all started.
Yeah. And anybody would respond the way that you did, but you used it to really turn it around. Anybody who had somebody betray them like you had, and your emails were very well written, and they were to the point, they were so well written, but as it was, you were still launching an attack on her that did feel good in the moment, but later on you reflected on that was probably not the best route to do, and you wouldn't have done it again. The thing is we as women, a lot of times, you know, we're blaming the other woman. We're blaming the other person for, you know, taking our man or stepping up on our man, but our man made the decision to do what he did. So it's not just the other person who's at fault, it's the person that you're with. And so many times and then we go back to the person. It also comes to like choosing better as well. You probably had a very strong relationship because coming from Greece, or families from the Greece, and you spent your summers in Greece, it's a lot different than, you know, American culture here, where it's very family. You had your relatives around you. What was that like? I just have to touch upon it because Greece is one of my most favorite places I have ever been to. We felt like goddesses the whole time we were there in summer. My girlfriend and I were like, this is the best trip ever, and it'll always be imprinted in my mind. So what was that like, spending your summers on the Greek islands? It's like that movie that was based off of ABBA. What was that one?
Oh, well, there's Mamma Mia, but then there's
Mamma
Sisterhood
Mia.
of Mamma Mia. We got married on one of the islands that Mamma Mia was shot on scaffolds. It was an experience, and still is an experience, that I am incredibly grateful for. Our family has a little summer home in a little village on an island of Evia, and there's no tourists. There's one road where you can find all the kids. We could go out on our dirt bikes and we could swim all day, and there was no fear of crime. And so there's a lot more freedom, and everyone knew whose child was whom. And it goes back generations. They knew who I was the granddaughter of. I was the only Greek American there. So everyone knew who I was. But with regards to family and culture, it's something we pass on to our son. My son is 23 months old, and he's been twice to Greece already. It's not just the food, but showing love by cooking for your family, by sitting together as a family, by not having electronics on. We sat together every single day at 2 p.m. after swimming together, and we ate and we talked. It was then taking a siesta and then going back to the beach, then with your friends. So having that quality family time, and then your friends were your family. I can't tell you how many of my grandparents' best friends and my dad's best friends were my uncles, even though by blood they weren't related. And same with my friends now. To my son, he has tons of uncles and aunts, even though I'm an only child. I tell people, Americans can get so caught up and we rush through our meals, we skip our meals. It's always like, what's next, what's next, what's next. And in Greece, when you go to sit with a family, they take their time. They're not worried, oh my God, I have to get up at 7 a.m. I have this conference. Oh, I have to deal with this person. Their mind isn't at work. They know how to shut it off, and they know to take their time. Okay, so what if you go to bed 30 minutes late? What's the end of the world? Why stress about it? And my husband, who's 100% Greek, definitely teaches me that, because sometimes I could get wound up, and he's like, okay, so it happened. Let's just move forward, and just kind of taking your time, enjoying the simple things, swimming, talking with your family, and the dancing. I'm a huge dancer. Celebrating life. They might not be the strongest economically. We all know this, but they have the biggest heart. I'm proud how they dealt with the coronavirus. And I just think sticking together with family is huge. Acknowledging your love, and some people show it through love, dance, cooking. And so I'm incredibly blessed, and we try to bring that every day as we're living here, because I think the Mediterranean way is the healthy way.
Yeah, they still have those bonds of family and being more present and in the moment. So taking what you grew up with and then bringing it into the present, now you're here, ready to uplift other women and to create this change of how we relate to each other. So what are some of the things that you are doing that you want to create as far as uplifting other women?
I think taking a beat goes back to my Greek lifestyle. When I took care of myself, when I was eating right, sleeping right, dancing, living life to the fullest, I wasn't negative. And so what I would like women to first say is look at yourself. Where are you unhappy? And be your own best friend. What I've learned is we are so hard on each other, on ourselves, meaning we're enemies to each other first. So the expectations we put on ourselves, we would never expect that of a best friend, of a colleague, of a direct report, of a sister, of anybody. And so when we start realizing we should talk to ourselves as we talk to our best friends, that's a step to eliminate the existence of womenemies. And then it's also to uplift. Instead of going negative, uplift. Every day, how can I uplift anybody? It doesn't have to be only a woman. It can be a man. It can be a child. How can I support and uplift another person? And I think the biggest key is that there's more than one seat at the table. And that's not just in the workplace. That's in life. A big example is mother-in-laws with their daughter-in-laws. Everybody Loves Raymond is a really funny show, but that I think that hit on it pretty typically. And I think I'll admit, when I was pregnant, 8 months pregnant, the thought of my son, who had not even entered into the world, he was still in my womb, the thought of my son leaving me made me cringe as a Greek mom. But it's more saying, I get to have an extra daughter in my family. There's another seat at the table for another phenomenal woman. And when we look at it rather than scarcity, but in abundance, it flips the switch. And it shows us that when we uplift other people, we progress in our lives, because it's just going to come right back to us.
And speaking of which, there's no competition. There's more than one seat at the table. I spent a lot of time in the entertainment industry, modeling, there's acting, and there's always going to be someone more beautiful, more smart, more intelligent. So instead of seeing someone that's so beautiful, I was always one that was just comment, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. I love your hair. And there's no jealousy involved in that. It's admiration. I have a group of girlfriends that we've actually been friends over 20 years. And there's like 7 of us that still keep in touch. Yes, there's been a little like friction along the ways, but we're still all together. And even during this self-quarantine, we're still in touch over text message threads. And I have another girlfriend. We've been friends since we were 14. So that's over over 40 years of friendships. So for me, I've always had that kind of friendship. And if anybody was being like the friend of me or, and I sensed that they weren't my friends anymore, I would keep them like at an arm's length, but I wouldn't bring them close to me. So I find it's very important, especially like Los Angeles, and you live in, Marina Del Rey. I used to live there. We used to be neighbors and didn't even know it. It's so important to have not just, women friends, but have that network of friends that you can rely on and trust. Because if you're in LA, there's dark sides in LA. You want to go the right route. So you need to have like the people that uplift you and that celebrate you and celebrate your wins, and there's not that competition, and you're not afraid of them talking or gossiping behind your back. So yeah, I think that's so important. And going back into the workplace, I know you're an attorney, right, in legal marketing.
Yes, I'm an attorney. I used to be doing legal marketing. I'm a VP of a small, it's not small anymore, went from 2 to 50 people in 5 years in Los Angeles. We do plaintiffs' employment work.
Okay. So you're in the work environment and legal field, or how would a woman, so I hear this a lot, we're going into this whole new rising of the feminine, and we've had so much with the Me Too movement and, women's rights. So we now have this right in our workplace, but we've been taught to be more like men, to like repress our emotions, to sacrifice over anything else, and we're doing it all, and we're getting burnt down, we're getting stressed out. So in the workplace, how does a woman, because vulnerability is actually where the strength is. Vulnerability is, there's so much power in it, and women in the workplace have been told, oh, you're too emotional, so they're too emotional. So how could you tell a woman to reside in her true source of strength as a vulnerable woman who has emotions? How can she be in this environment with all these, a lot of times, dominating men, and still stand in her truth and stand in her power?
That's an excellent question, and it's something I think that's very timely for any workplace, but especially the legal world. I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but I graduated at the top of my law school class. And when I went into practice, I had a lot of people saying, you're too nice to be an attorney. When I became a manager, I had switched over to operations and for a international company that did dispute resolution. When I started there, I had a lot of people and friends externally, not just at work, saying, you're too nice to be somebody's boss. You're overseeing a team now. You need to be really strict and not mean, but don't be a pushover. And they related being vulnerable or emotional to being a pushover. And I, thank goodness, had really great mentors that say, when you're being yourself, you are not a pushover. When you try to act like somebody else, you're giving people room to push you over because that doesn't come naturally to you. So I've had the honor of leading some amazing people, and I've always led through showing my vulnerability. And I also had a great boss and mentor. She was always very vulnerable. So she would say, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? And that is what an exceptional leader does, because a leader won't know everything. They'll know their team members and how to cultivate and basically have them shine to upper management and basically train their talent. That's a great leader. A great leader can't do everything. A great leader delegates and trains up great talent. So being emotional, I think a lot of people code that as a bad word, like you're going to cry at work. That doesn't mean you're going to cry at work. Emotional means that you have emotional intelligence. That means that when you see somebody who's burnt out, you're not going to give them an additional assignment. That means that when someone what to you think would have been an easy accomplishment, but for them it might have been something that they've stepped out of their comfort zone, you have the capacity to acknowledge that and say, wow, you really stepped out of your comfort zone. This is the first time you've spoken at this. Yes, congratulations. And just stopping there and not saying what's next. A lot of the time, the masculine way of leading is what's next. Let's not celebrate in the moment. And what women do is they celebrate the moment and they acknowledge another person's emotions. If someone's upset at work, they acknowledge it. They say, okay, why are you upset right now? I'm noticing that in your body language. I'm noticing that. The way I'm speaking right now, I'm not a pushover. If I tell somebody, hey, you're coming off this way, is that your intention? That puts them on notice, but it's not attacking them. It's attacking their actions. So I know it's really hard to say be you, but what I've learned is the times where I've tried to be more strict or act more authoritative than my natural being would be, I ended up coming off as fake. No one listened to me. And when I led from saying good morning, checking in how people are, and then giving constructive feedback, I've never laid away from that. People listened to me. And I go back from my experience when I had my boss who led me for 4 years. She would be vulnerable. She would congratulate me. She would show me that she was invested in me. And there were times she gave me very tough love, but I knew it was coming from a place because she wanted me to be better. So I would say, yeah, you're going to probably be judged as being too kind or you're caring too much, but maybe that's not the place for you eventually to work at, and maybe you can make a difference in your workplace until you find like minds.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing you're saying, it sounds like it's coming from, as women, we're intuitive. It's using your intuition, assessing a situation, having empathy for other people and having compassion for them and leading from that place. When you stand in your truth and that's who you are and not trying to be someone else, people will resonate with your vulnerability. It connects to them and you can still have a sense of power because you're sensing how the other person's doing and being instead of pushing them against something that doesn't feel right to them. So I think it's inherent for the feminine.
100%. And I would challenge if someone says you're being too emotional, I would say, well, thank you. I'm glad I have a great emotional intelligence, but if you're meaning this in a negative way, what do you mean? And if they say you're taking this personally, you can then, if you just fight back with facts, it kind of, flips the script to them and it makes them realize what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Putting it back at them.
Yes.
Yeah. So what is lighting you up next?
Well, I appreciate asking that. Writing the book was an incredibly healing process for me because it made me look at myself and how I can be better. And now I'm still on that journey. In my book, I talk about ways I am a womenemy and how I've overcome that. And so I'm not holier than thou. I'm still leading this life and this journey of life. So what lights me up is talking about the book, engaging in conversations with other women and men, because men are the biggest advocates. We need to have everybody. It's not just one gender. About instances they're experiencing. There's a lot of more instances of womenemies. And how can we make a better work culture? How can we make a better society? How can we make better friendships, familiar relationships, romantic relationships? So how can we treat each other better is the goal. And so what really lights me up is speaking on podcasts, doing workshops, speaking at women's groups or companies that want to understand more than just the women need to treat each other better. And I think it's great that a lot of companies are doing diversity and inclusion and saying, talking about paying women equally, talking about including more women at the table, but we can't stop there because women do a great job of standing up when they are the ones, for women's rights together. But when we come to being across the table from one another, it's unhealthy competition. There's cattiness. And that's what we need to eliminate. We need to take it a step further and realize those signs and realize how we can eliminate it.
And can you give us a few examples of how, if you're sitting across from each other in a work space and there's that competition or there's that jealousy and there's that, it's stemming from insecurity with the other person or competitiveness, what are a few examples that you would give somebody to eliminate that?
Right. Well, the whole premise of my book is you need to acknowledge the enemy and the instance of the enemy, not the woman. It's not the actual person. There's an action there. So if you're having one example where you feel there is toxicity in the relationship with another woman, all you can do is come from a good place and have a meeting and acknowledge it right then, saying, I'm feeling this way. It might not be correct, but I want to address it because I want us to have a better relationship, because then the company gets better. And say, this is how I feel when you did this. This is what makes me feel. So you're not coming so aggressively that they're just going to be taken aback and wanting to protect themselves. And ask them too, do you feel the same way? Is there something that I can do better? You know what? You might get two results. You may get someone that says, no, everything's great, and they continue being a toxic, competitive person, but at least you've put them on notice and you've done everything you can. And then you have to just say, you know what? I've done everything I can. I have been tempted. I am in the workplace, not where I currently am. I'm proud where we are, but in past jobs, to fight back and to try to get that person highlighted on mistakes they've made. But that what I realize is doing that and the energy it takes to try to get them is going to take away from you shining at your talents. So what I would say is do your best, come from a place of care, of trying to repair a relationship, acknowledge it. If they don't want to rise above and meet you there, don't fight back. You can stand up for yourself and then move on, because their ways are going to eventually show. If they continue that route, it's not karma. It's going to show. You don't have to be the person to highlight that. Regarding a competition, you can still congratulate your competitor. You can say good luck. If they end up getting a promotion that you didn't, if you're gracious and say, I think that's wonderful, and you uplift them, you know what, there might be another role down the line that's opening up, and that person might become your advocate. It's I would say the more you congratulate other people and the more you show being gracious and that you're doing your best, your work is going to speak for itself. You can self-promote. I think women need to do that as well, is that it's okay for them to talk about all the things they're doing. You're not being cocky. You're not gloating, but then also congratulate other people and leave it at that. And then if there's something that's really bothering you about somebody, write it down and think, why is that bothering me? Is that something I see in myself? If I see somebody that's bothering me because they're taking on too much work and they're burnt out and they're always negative, is it bothering me because I've burnt myself out? Do I need to fix myself first before I judge somebody else? Those are a couple little tips, but I think the biggest tip is focus on yourself first and self-care. And my last chapter of the book, which I'm going to expand on probably in a sequel, is don't be a womenemy to yourself. You got to take care of yourself. And this comes from myself. I burnt myself out when I switched jobs to my current job. My father came to take care of my son. He ended up getting sick. I was his caretaker. He ended up passing away. And I tried to do everything for everybody else but myself. And so the hard lesson. So I'm trying to say, don't wait till that air mask has to be put on. Start taking care of yourself now.
Yeah, so you touched upon something so important where everything stems from is yourself. It's how not to be a woman to yourself. Really, when there's a situation, it's taking a pause, stepping back and assessing, like you said, where is this coming from? Is this something in me I need to look at and address? And is it really this other person? Because it's really never really the other person, it's you. Most of the time. I mean, there are some instances where some people just can't be saved and you just kind of wipe your hands and walk away from it. Or if you're in a work environment, you kind of just do what you need to do in that work situation and just, keep the distance from the rest. And another thing you touched upon is so important is having the courage to talk about it instead of like talking to your coworker or talking to your friend and talking about it with everyone except the person that you actually have the issue with. It's actually having the courage to come from a place of love, coming from a place of compassion and caring, and having this open communication and dialogue with this person. Someone's always going to hear you from what they're hearing. You're not responsible for it. How they take it is up to them because they're perceiving everything you're saying from their own filters or seeing it from their own truth. So you just have to have the courage to have this conversation with this other person. And a lot of people are not. They're complaining about it, but not addressing. And that goes for friendships, that goes for work situations, and that goes with your loved one, your spouse, whoever you're dating, your parents. We have to have the courage. And it's vulnerable. It's so scary. We're afraid to do it because when we do bring it to the table, that we're being vulnerable. We're exposing ourselves. So many times we talk ourselves out of talking to someone because we're having this whole scenario in our mind, how we think it's going to go. And we always look at the worst case scenarios and how are they going to take this? Well, like I said, it's not your responsibility how they can take it. It's your responsibility to speak your truth in a compassionate, caring way.
Correct. And if you kind of go back, what's the worst that can happen? They don't change and everything's status quo. What's the best thing that can happen? You can feel like you congratulate yourself on having the courage to speak it. You feel an immense emotional release because you've just gotten it out there and you can move on. Same thing with women asking for what they're rightfully owed in the workplace. The worst a person can say is no. Yeah. And when you ask, sometimes they really reflect that. And I think that's something that goes back generations of being seen but not heard, being the good girl, being the straight A student, but not asking for a lot. And guys will go ahead and apply for that job, ask for what they want, and they sometimes get it just because they asked, even though they had less qualifications, but they just had I wouldn't say the courage, they just asked because they didn't think that there was ramifications from asking.
Yeah, having the courage to have a no. A no is a no. A no is always a no unless you ask, unless you bring it up. And I've actually been surprised in situations where I had this period in my life where I wanted everyone to like me and like, oh, what are they going to think of me? And so afraid to especially my last relationship, to really speak my truth because I was so afraid of losing that person. But I was losing myself. I lost myself. I wasn't speaking up. I was walking on eggshells. I betrayed myself. And it's just really having that courage to have the no, or courage to, maybe they're going to take you the wrong way. But like we said, that's not your own responsibility. You're speaking your truth and coming from a place of love. And so many times I know I've done it where I'm like, oh my gosh, what are they going to think if I ask that? They're going to think I'm, and that stems back to childhood where we might have been thought that we're too much or selfish for asking these things. So that little childhood voice in the head is trying to like, oh, protect yourself from getting punished, even though like 40 years later, 30 years later, it's like, okay, well, I'm adult now, and I should have the courage to be able to ask for what I need to and not be afraid of being punished.
No, exactly. And also when you do that, you'll notice that the people you have around you are the most uplifting and supportive people, because who cares if someone doesn't think a certain way? Do you really want that person in your life? People that you are going to be like-minded with are going to accept you 100% and see what you love about yourself. And so that's been my journey. And I think that we need to see that in each other. And that when women come together and support each other, there is no stopping it. So that's what I'm trying to get the message out.
There's no stopping it. There's no stopping it. And us as women, we know when we take a minute to really get out of our heads and really drop into our bodies tell us all the time. We're not our minds, we're our heart and our bodies. And it's that pit in the gut or the tightness in the throat, it's a constricting feeling. And it's more when we're around women that really support and elevate each other, there's such an expansive opening. And, it goes back to the ancient days, like where all raised our children together. We were in clans, we were in villages, and we raised our children together. We cooked together, and we still see that when I travel overseas. I see that in Indonesia. I see that in Thailand. There's still such that close bond, and they really support each other because that's how they survive. That's how they live through those harsh winters or live through those famines. And we need to bring that back now in this modern day and age, is with women to really, and with men to really work together. And women, we really need to support each other and not have this competitiveness and thrive.
Exactly. Because if you think about all the time it takes to self-protect and to guard and to, deal with all this drama, if we eliminated that drama and focused on all the creativity, I mean, the world would be a much better place. And it's so simple to take away from that drama. And that's what I really want to share, because there are so many more instances of women uplifting each other, and that's what we need to focus on.
Mm-hmm. And it all begins with one person. We change the world one person at a time, and it begins with ourselves.
Correct.
I want to touch upon, I know at the end of your book, you had said something about the Women's Code. There's a chapter called the Women's Code, and I would love for you to give just a few of the keys from the Women's Code.
Right. So there's about, there's a list of it, and it's a lesson from each one of the chapters. So, and sometimes each chapter has a couple lessons. And this stems from, I don't know if you remember, there was this commercial that was like man law. It was a beer commercial. And there's always, you hear the bro code, but you never ever hear girls code, because we have none right now. We need to create one. So, there's one of keep your friend's secrets in the strictest confidence. Counsel your friend not to be the other woman. That's one other than just don't be the other woman. Embrace and welcome your significant other's platonic female friends. There's a lot more about being the mother-in-law. The one that I end with is don't be a womenemy to yourself. Be kind, caring, and supportive to yourself. Treat yourself as you would treat your best friend. So there's 13 lessons in there, but they sum up the entire book. And when people read it, they'll see it. But it's all about how we can be kinder and better to each other. And just maybe if we keep them somewhere where we can see, it will remind us how to behave on a day-to-day basis. I would love to see a girls' code or women's code get out there, because men can't just have the bro code.
No bro code, women's code. And with that, you're passing on this message and you have your book out there. I would love for our listeners to know how to find you.
Yes. So my website's new, womenemies.com, and there you can find all my Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook handles for my individual accounts too. Instagram and Facebook, it's Marilena Fallaris. But for the book also has Womenemies, has a Facebook and Instagram page. So it has all of that links. You can email me through the website. I've gotten a lot of people who've reached out, who've read it and said they connected and they had a conversation. I'm always up for a conversation. If people want me to come in and speak at a conference or with their company, I'm not pigeonholing myself right now. How I can support getting the message out, I'll do it. So I'm open to brainstorming sessions as well and supporting other women.
Great. And I'll definitely put those in the show notes as well. So it'll be really easy for everyone to find you. With that, I would like to wrap up with my last question. How would you describe awakened heart? What does an awakened heart mean to you?
An awakened heart means waking up and feeling your joy and letting that joy and intention carry throughout the day, and meaning that you are basically living your truth and speaking your vulnerabilities to help others in this world. And when you do that, you are the most fulfilled.
Oh, I love that. Joy, vulnerability, and sharing that. Oh, Marilena, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful to have you here. I am so thrilled with everything that you're sharing with the world now.
Well, thank you, and ditto back to you. I think you're hitting on a very important topic that I hope goes international. So thank you so much, and I'll do whatever I can to support you as well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Awaken Heart podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, share it with a friend. And if you haven't already, head on over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, you can reach me at theawakenheartpodcast.com.